Support for the roundup comes from Symphony 3, allowing councils to connect their systems securely, to automate their data flows and to monitor performance in real time. And right now, councils are lining up for their own emergency dashboard, like the one that Symphony 3 has created for the city of Greater Bendigo. The dashboard helps keep the community safe and prepared before, during and after emergencies. It pulls together live data, including weather data, traffic data, emergency incidents, unplanned and planned disruptions, news and social media feeds. Visit www.symphony3.com to learn how you can get an emergency dashboard for your community. Hello, Chris Eddy here with another special edition of the Local Government News Roundup, brought to you as always by the Victorian Local Governance Association, the national broadcaster on all things local government, with support from Symphony 3, simple, connected customer experiences, and Rath Engineering Development, smarter local government systems built from real on-the-ground experience. Today we're joined by Martin Taylor, a barrister, solicitor and councillor at the City of Whittlesea, and a prolific author on the intersection of law and public policy. Martin has recently published a comprehensive 2-volume set on environmental crime, alongside a new vital guide to community safety and crime prevention. From the shifting landscape of illegal rubbish dumping to the emerging threats of youth gang violence and online identity theft, today we explore the practical small-scale actions that every citizen can take to minimise their risk and the systemic changes required to protect our communities. Community safety and crime prevention, today on the Local Government News Roundup. Martin Taylor, good to have you back on the Roundup. Welcome.
Chris, it's good to be here with you today. I just want to say as we start, that I'm here in my context as my personal capacity, not as a councillor or a former mayor with the City of Whittlesea, although I'm very proud of both.
Interesting you say that, because I've heard some conversations recently about how difficult it is to remove the councillor hat in different settings. It's almost impossible, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Look, there are some legal issues and I had to go right into the case law in order to establish it, and I did. But I needed to familiarise myself in relation to that.
Sure. All right. Having said that, you're here as an author, and can I say fairly prolific one. We were going to be chatting about your 2-volume set on environmental crime, but before we even had the chance to do that, you've spat out another book on community safety. So let's talk about the whole lot. Why have you felt the need to put all of these thoughts down on paper, Martin?
I think there's 2 issues there, Chris. One is I actually started the community safety long before the environmental crime books. So I was well and truly into that. I started that when I first was elected to council. I saw a lot of issues in relation to crime, rising crime that was occurring. I started looking at the empirical crime data and overlaying it within my ward particularly, which I'm a representative of, and then it sort of grew from there. Then when I became mayor of the City of Whittlesea, I started looking at some of the more prolific issues that we'll be confronted with, and you would know that illegal rubbish dumping is one of the significant ones. And it's also, I have to say, community safety and illegal rubbish dumping are on councils' advocacy lists in relation to advocating against with state and federal politicians anyway. So I sort of stopped the community safety in order to write the book on illegal rubbish dumping. And when it first started, Chris, it was only about 8 pages. And you remember from our last interview last year in November, it was about 80 pages. And of course, then it built up by the time I finished the research and putting it in place and overlaying it to what was actually happening in real life. It grew into 700 pages, and then it required 2 books because the publisher published it as one.
I was going to make that point. Why the 2 volumes? The publisher suggested that, did they?
Yeah, it's too big. It was the book itself would have been too wide. Even the community safety book is pushing the limits in relation to that, and you'll see that as well. And the way I got around that, it was 1,000 typed 4 pages to community safety book. And I was able to bring it down by negotiating with the publisher to reduce the fonts and those kinds of issues to bring it down into one book.
So it's about 540 pages, that community
Correct.
safety book. And as you
Correct.
say, the 2 volumes on the environmental crime issue.
Correct.
Why
Yeah.
is it important for you to do this in your capacity as a lawyer rather than through a political or a government lens?
We are restricted. Councillors have certain restrictions by law, as you know. We're governed by the model councillor rules in relation to those issues, plus also the legislation under the Local Government Act. And there are, especially as a mayor represents the whole of council, so you can't sort of step out and undertake those particular advocacy issues in those capacities. And it's just easier to be able to identify what's going on, get it out amongst the community, but more so, to me, it was about educating the community. It was about letting them know that I saw what was going on. And not only did I see what was going on, I actually did something about it. So I sat down and started writing. And it was very difficult, Chris, because you remember I have a fairly good legal practice, plus my council role, which, as you know, I take very seriously, and I'm out there all the time with the community. And then my family issues, and then sitting up till 3 o'clock most mornings writing a book before I start work again can be fairly extensive. So that's basically why I did it. I did it because I can have a far greater reach in my personal capacity than what I can as a councillor.
There's a central message, if we can focus mainly today on the new book, the Community Safety and Crime Prevention piece. There's a central message through here about repeated small actions, if I've picked that up correctly. Can you tell us what you mean by that? What's a small action that an average person perhaps overlooks but significantly reduces their safety risk?
I'll give you an example. So just as a background issue to this, when I was doing my PhD, which was in educational administration, I looked at education models, and I think it's important. They have an education model for adults. We have an education model for youths and children, but we don't actually have an education model that actually joins the two of them together so as they can pick up a piece of writing and understand it. So I actually developed it and I copyrighted it. So, and that's what the second book the book in relation to community justice studies and crime prevention's actually been written. So when we talk about those actions, we're talking about habits. So we're talking about people who park their car in the car park in the same spot, get out and take the same route. And they walk down past the same crowded trees that have blocked the sight lines on the car park, between the car park, which is secluded, and maybe more open areas where people can see. But they take the same routes all the time. They drive home exactly the same route. So these habits are very easily to identify. And the reason why I wrote that for is because I looked at, and police do this all the time, they look at it through the lens of what would a criminal look for? What would a person who's looking for options to undertake criminality? And we start looking at things like home invasions, for instance, which is actually a chapter in the book, where, serious and organised crime are involved in relation to a lot of those particular offences. And they look for patterns and easy targets, quick reward. And that's what we're talking about, those actions. You've got to change your habits in order to be self-aware and to minimise the possibility of being a victim of crime.
You've got a chapter on that, haven't you, about how offenders read a place, and you talk about hardening the target. How do you do that without making it feel like we're living in a war zone or a high security zone? You know, that balance between being safe and actually being open and welcoming.
I'll give you an example. When my grandma was alive, she used to tell me how they would go shopping and leave the back door open and the front door open. No one does that anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're already changing our habits in relation to some of those issues. Maybe some of the rural people do.
I was going to say, in the built-up urban areas, definitely those sort of habits have changed, but out in the country, there's perhaps still a very open sort of aspect
and I think that's
to life.
why, and as we start increasing crime offending, because what's going to happen is that once we start target hardening, that means making it more difficult for somebody to commit an offence against us and our property, and then they'll move out. So we'll push them out into rural areas. So eventually rural areas are going to have to start adopting some of the target hardening processes that we're now doing within urban areas, and we'll need to do that. And I think the book's really important because what I did was I looked at the top 20 offences that people are being subjected to in Victoria and mostly in the City of Whittlesea. And then I looked at some of the more offences that people were concerned about. I have to say, not big, but there was a perception in relation to it. So machete attacks, where we're talking about carjacking, where we're talking about issues about home invasions. So yes, they're home invasions, but they're not big when it comes to comparing it to assaults and domestic violence and those kinds of issues. So what I did was I wrote a chapter on the empirical data of what offences are being committed in Victoria. And the difference here is, I said, these are the offences. These are what you need to do in order to target, harden yourself. In other words, to make it more difficult. And I'll give you an example. If someone wants to break into your house, Chris, and you've got shutters on the window and a security door, they're going to go next door where there is no security door and there are no shutters and there's no cameras out the front and there's no, doorbell camera system, because they don't want to be detected. They want to get in and out quickly and obtain quick profit. And that's the issue. So by target hardening yourselves and taking certain steps, we can ensure that we minimise that opportunity of people offending against us and our family. And I'll give you a really good example, and I write about it in the book. A lot of people walk in the front door and they leave their keys right near the front door.
Yeah.
That is somebody who's breaking into the house, perfect dream. Or they'll get out and in their car and they'll park it in the car park at the railway station and they leave the roller door fob in the glove box of the car. So someone who breaks into the car sees the registration details, because a lot of people I've spoken to keep their car registration details in their glove box, together with the remote control from their garage. That person knows they're not there and they go straight around to the house and they rob it. 9 times out of 10, the door between the house and the garage, they don't lock. So once you've got the roller door key, and opens up the roller door, you then got free access to the house. Now, there's no alarm system in there. That's what happens. So by target hardening yourself, you can prevent that.
Pretty sad that we have to think about this sort of stuff.
Look, it is. And I think, but this is not something that we have initiated ourselves. This is crime that's occurring within our neighbourhoods, and it's occurring for a number of reasons: drug-related offences, domestic assaults and family violence. And we're also talking about now the emerging issues about youth gang violence and those things. So in order to ensure that we minimise the opportunity, that we have to undertake these certain steps. So what I did was I wrote about it. Yeah. So the book talks about how to target harden yourself. But the next thing it does, which is not, and you have a look at, do any kind of analytical analysis simulation to books that have been published in Australia, no book has talked about target hardening and then says, this is what you do if you actually find yourself a victim of that crime.
Right.
And it goes through the process to minimise. And of course, the number one priority for any crime, for any person's being exposed to, is to come out safely, still alive.
So you also get into some of the more modern issues that are emerging, like online identity protection in the book.
Yes.
So the landscape of risk, it's changed a lot in recent years, hasn't it?
Look, it has. And the two issues that were my motivation for doing that was more youth and what youth do. And I won't go into great detail, but it's fairly common. And more so the issue about our elderly citizens, because they're more trusting. They'll touch on a link and they know the car registration is coming on. It says, link here for your car registration. And in actual fact, what it's done is it's downloaded an algorithm program on the computer. So next time they access their bank accounts, bang, they've got all that information. So you just need to be careful on how to do that and what are considerations that are required. And that chapter in relation to that covers those issues fairly extensively.
So, Martin, you are here because you are a councillor and a former mayor, and I know you've written the books with a different hat on, if I can put it that way. But to bring it to some relevance for a local government audience in particular, I notice you advocate that every municipality should have a community safety advisory committee. Why do you think that's more effective than perhaps some other traditional policing type responses?
Right. So that was really interesting. I saw that myself when I first joined council. I saw that some councils like Marybeck have very effective community safety advisory committees. And then I thought, well, we have 79 councils, Chris, in Victoria. How many of them actually have a community safety advisory committee? And 9.
Is that right? Only 9? Okay.
Right. So where are you getting the issue about a community safety advisory committee is you're bringing together police, council, community services, community groups, and representatives together. And the issue about a community safety advisory council is it enables us an opportunity to be able to say, these are identifiable issues that are occurring and therefore we can identify hotspot issues very quickly in relation to crime before a lot of crime offending started to take place. And then from that, you can coordinate through that committee as to what are the appropriate resources to minimise the possibility of that criminal offending occurring. And you do that through the groups that are there. But the major thing that's really relevant for a community safety advisory committee is the sharing of intelligence that each of these people would have and bring to a central location. Now, when I went to the last police forum, I was speaking with the district superintendent and the assistant commissioner for the Victoria Police. And one of the issues they raised with me when I was talking to them about is the importance of a community safety advisory committee. So they didn't know I was already walking down this road, and they themselves were saying the urgency of it. Within Whittlesea, we don't have one. In my capacity as a councillor, I wrote to the CEO, I've written to councillors and advised them of what I think we require. But I think in this case, it's just easier to step out in an author capacity as a barrister and solicitor and subject matter expert and just say, this is why we need them. Every council needs them. And this is what you're going to achieve from it. And what you'll actually do is through that coordination of that intelligence, that early identification of criminal hotspot areas, you're going to reduce the possibility of crime. Now, the issue here is unless the next council along has a community safety advisory committee, you're going to push all that crime out of one council area into another council area. So that's why each council needs to be adopted, just to make it so that you're retarding the probability of that criminal offending. And that's the basis of it.
There's a concept in this that's popped up in this book that I was hearing about decades ago, Martin, and I haven't heard much about it more recently, and that is the CPTED concept, crime prevention through environmental design. Is that still a thing that's actively applied?
Look, it is. And it was very interesting, Chris, because in my first degree, I studied civil engineering. And one of the major components of it was, of course, crime prevention through environmental design. Now, when you come into a council town planners are very big in relation to this issue. And it's one of the primary concepts they'll look at in relation to the design of a new estate that's being considered. So the issue about that is, and they call it CPTED, obviously, is to ensure that when you are developing a site for possible development, that you have clear sight lines, that there are effective methodologies to be able to move around quickly within that particular environment that you're establishing, that the role of safer design and guidelines are being adapted more effectively, that there's natural access, that there is maintenance and management issues that are effectively undertaken to ensure that you have that minimisation of any possibility of looking disorganised. Because when you walk into a community that's hard to get into, and they are, because in a lot of cases you find a lot of planning is they coordinate the issues for traffic in and out of a particular area that's been designed, but it's always the last thing to do. It's not the first one. I mean, have a look at Donnybrook Road, for instance, in Melbourne. So issues like that are really important for early development.
So these are principles that need to be applied early on when subdivisions are being designed, developed. Is it and placemaking activities that councils undertake and planning scheme amendments, all of those sorts of processes? Is that where this comes in?
Absolutely. You have a look at council in Whittlesea just introduced a number of new parks. Fantastic. And I go down there, everyone that's in my ward, I go down and have a look. And the first thing I look for is sight lines. I look for where the parents are going to be sitting and watching the kids play. Can they see them directly? If they can see them directly, they're going to be more relaxed to sit down and talk. You know, parents will go down and have a talk while the children are playing. If you can see them, if you can see that there's no hazards, if you can see what's around you, become self-aware of what's going on, you can look out for any possible dangers that might occur and react very quickly. That's very positive, CPTED.
And geospatial analysis is another concept that you think should be paid more attention to?
Yeah, look, one of the issues I looked at in relation to illegal rubbish dumping was the law reform that's required. And there are significant law reforms that are required. And you may be aware that last year I put up a notice of motion for council in relation to some of those, two of those in particular. And that went through. Council endorsed that. It went to the Allen government representative, one of the local politicians here, and they adopted it. So that particular issue was about the increase of infringement notice penalties to make it more of a deterrence. The issue about illegal rubbish dumping and how to stop it is effective deterrence. So one of the issues I looked at was increasing penalties in court. vehicle and equipment forfeiture for those people that use vehicle and equipment involved in illegal rubbish dumping, the mandatory waste transport registration and GPS vehicle traffic, the changing of the corporations law to incorporate company directors and officers to have increased personal liability when the company that's been involved in the illegal rubbish dumping has gone into liquidation in order to avoid payment. That'll come out of the pocket of the directors. The landfill levy reinvestment models for task force situations, which is a big issue that I'm really keen on. But one of the issues I looked at was geospatial analysis, space-time modelling, geographic information to identify system hotspots, and more importantly, to change the law to enable the evidence to be used from satellite technology. So what that means is this. We know that at the moment satellites fly over, let's say, a location, let's talk about in a neighbouring council, and I'll just make up the council's name. Let's call it the Council of Billong. And Council of Billong, these remote areas, will take 7 photos a week. So what it can do is it can look at build-up of volume of rubbish, more importantly, car tyres, truck tyres, those kinds of issues. And it can identify very quickly that these sites are being used for illegal rubbish dumping, which will enable what I call the surgical response of a task force. So that is specific, applied directly to the issue to minimise that issue from occurring, and then apprehend and put what resources are required in there in order to identify those persons that are involved. Most of them would be commercial operators in serious organised crime. You're going to get one or two of the local mum and dad people that are just doing a one-off situation. But by targeting those resources, we can prevent it from occurring before it becomes a major financial impost against the council and, more importantly, ratepayers.
Yeah.
So we need to incorporate that issue to enable geospacing analysis. And we can do that. It's something that's relatively cheap. It's something that we can do. And it's something about the capabilities I talk about in the formation of a new tri-council waste management task force.
So, Martin, last time we spoke, we were talking about illegal dumping, some of those issues you've just covered there, and then your 2-volume book, Environmental Crime, came out. Have we had much of a reaction or a response to that issue of illegal dumping in those last 6 months?
I haven't followed the issue. I get a lot of information, people contacting me and talking to me about it as a councillor, and I respond to it fairly quickly. But what's actually happened is community awareness has been focused. I've been invited to give papers to 5 conferences. I've got another interview next week and a major conference coming up in June. So people are starting to focus on the issues of illegal rubbish dumping. The difference about the books, as I mentioned to you last time, was I looked at from an investigative point of view. And I looked about capability, technology, and the issues that we could incorporate that are not being incorporated currently within local councils. And I think by lifting that capability, what we're going to do is have a greater response, reduction in serious and organised crime and criminal rubbish dumping, environmental crime rubbish dumping, and then from that save significant amounts of money. And I talk about the issues about deployment, for instance, of drone technology and the utilisation of infrared camera systems. Currently, councils will use a CCTV camera system that goes into, once it's activated, into real-time filming. So what could possibly happen is in order to find that particular offence that might have taken 15 minutes, it's going to take someone 3 days to go through all the video footage and find it. AI technology will enable the quick identification, go straight to the spot where the offending's occurring. I went and spoke to companies. I'm talking about changing the algorithm programs to say, look, if a couple of people have gone parking, Chris, for instance, in the middle of the night in nowhere, the camera's not going to activate. But if they pull up in a trailer and they open the boot of the car and all of a sudden a box comes out, AI technology is going to pick up that that's an unusual movement and immediately start filming it. So when investigators go back, they're going to go straight to that point. And it's going to save a lot of money and time for our council officers undertaking those investigations.
So it occurs to me, Martin, that you've got 3 volumes here, 2 on environmental crime, 1 on community safety and crime prevention. It must cost a bit to produce these books. Why do you do it?
Yes, I've probably put about $10,000 of my own money into it, and I do it for the community, Chris. So it's all about my community. None of it's about profit. In fact, in relation to the community safety and crime prevention, it's free. So the ebook is free on purpose. And I have 3 different publishers, and those other publishers that can't, the minimum I can put it out to is for 90 cents, and that covers their cost, and that's what I do. The other money I put into purchasing printed books. and I hand them out free to the community, to selected community groups. Now, in relation to the community safety and crime prevention, I'm handing it out to seniors groups, to schools, those kinds of issues, because I identify those legal issues they need to be mindful of. Now, I'm not here to go and teach a school what a school should be doing because they're all over it. They know it themselves. But maybe they won't know about the offences that it's happening when kids are walking home from school, going down a particular pathway. They're subjected to gang activities. They're subjected to physical activities at railway stations and car parks and those kinds of issues. And they are extended issues that need to be mindful of that are covered in the book. Now, we've had some issues just of late within the municipality where I am in relation to railway stations, robberies, serious assaults and unfortunate case we've had
tragic stuff. Yeah,
tragic stuff occur. So the book actually covers on that. So the book addresses those issues.
Martin, how can people get a hold of these books? If look, and I've got to say too, while the topic might to some appear to be a bit dry, they're not a hard read. They're actually very easy to read through, and there's a lot of useful information. So how can people get a hold of them?
Look, there's probably the best way to do it at the moment will be on Amazon. There, as I said, there are a couple of other publishers, but I think Amazon is more the basic one that people can access. Freely there, all the books are on there. The issue that I would say that would have the greatest impact, immediate impact in relation to not only a sense of safety, but having that incorporated within our daily lives would be the community safety and crime prevention book. And I think a lot of people will find that of significance. And I have to say to you, I did one thing in particular, Chris, that was really important. I did that with my daughter when she was young. And that was I come up with safety words. So if she was somewhere that needed my help and people were around her, not to pick up the phone and say, Dad, come and get me, I need help, because of what would be there. So I would have her say things like, Dad, I've left the heater on, can you turn it off? Now, people standing around her, for instance, would know she's talking about the heater. I know she's saying, Dad, I need your help, you need to come and get me straight away. Little things like that are covered in the book that will help people with their own personal safety. And I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Martin, always great to talk. Thank you so much again for your time. And I hope as many people as possible can digest this information that you're putting out there to ultimately make communities safer and work more effectively as a cohesive unit. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's what it's all about. Thanks very much.
That was Martin Taylor, author and councillor, offering a deep dive into the complex world of environmental crime and community safety. As he emphasised, enhancing safety is often a matter of breaking predictable habits and adopting a proactive mindset towards our surroundings. Look for Martin's new book on community safety. It's a free ebook on Amazon for those looking to further explore those essential personal safety strategies. I hope you've enjoyed that special edition of the Roundup. More special editions coming this week, and we return to regular episodes next week. It's all thanks to our sponsors, the VLGA, Symphony 3 and Rath Engineering Development. This podcast is recorded in Greater Geelong, Victoria, on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Until next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now. Support for the Local Government News Roundup comes from Rath Engineering Development, smarter systems for local government, like Red GMS, helping councils manage gravel pits and projects, track quality, test results, blending options and haulage, and know the true cost per tonne from day one. Rath Engineering Development can give you a one-off report that uses your existing pit data to pinpoint the best gravel sources for your next resheeting program or disaster restoration works, saving your council time and money. For local government systems built from real on-the-ground experience, talk to the team at Rath Engineering Development. Head to rathed.com.au to find out more.